Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Mr. Sidney Roundwood.
Thank you, and welcome. Hello, good evening, and welcome to this, our third Lard Island Oddcast. I'm Sidney Roundwood, and tonight I'm joined once again by the men they call Fat Nick and Big Rich, the twin beating hearts in the very chest cavity of Lard. Gentlemen, welcome.
Who calls me Fat Nick?
Who said I've got a heart?
Gentlemen, we've been back from our Belgian jaunt for a while now.
That's easy for you to say, Sid. Why don't we just go straight to the workshop, mate, and see whether anything that we bought there has got to the table yet, eh?
Well, we could do that.
Don't worry, mate. I can read and talk at the same time.
Rich, what about you?
Well, not so much what I bought in Euroland, to be honest with you, because what I tend to do is buy things and allow them to mature in the Lard Island cellars for several years.
I think we all do that.
It was only a couple of years ago that I found a plastic bag marked with the words "Salute 1986." And everything that I'd purchased at that show therein. I actually then took the bag outside and put it straight in the dustbin, working on the basis that if I hadn't required this for 30 years, it wasn't even worth looking inside.
Possibly no longer a live project, as we like to say.
No, right. Well, however, I have got some stuff on the table that I have been working on. And I'm really excited about. I've been working on it I've had it actually maturing on the work table for a long time, and that's my Stalingrad project. I bought a whole table's worth of buildings from a company in Poland in MDF for £100. And it's just a huge amount of buildings which are absolutely ideal for Stalingrad. Some of them are residential. There's a few sort of small factory things, and I'm going to supplement that with some model railway stuff. But what I'm doing is it's a great deal. Don't get me wrong, but the models are cheap and cheerful. But that's exactly what I want the structure to be. And inspired by Alcal 50, Alan Sherwood, for those of you who know him, who built the phenomenal Stalingrad terrain for the show, the Lardy Games Day in Ypres. I took some tips from him and bought some of this brick wallpaper, which I'm going to apply. I'm actually going to, on the outside, I'm going to apply a layer of foam board to make the walls denser, and then do a bit of plastering on that. And I'm really going to take the basic MDF models, and I've started now to build them up and really try and turn them into something that's going to look good. And the objective is to get a table about 4 foot by 3 foot initially, because I reckon with all that cover on the table and rubble and things like that, you can have a great game of Chain of Command on there. You really don't need to fill a 6x4 table up. It would be nice then to take that up to 6x4 to take round to some of the shows. So that's what I'm focusing on at the moment. I'm having a lot of fun with looking around eBay to try and find some bits and pieces from Model Railway World in 00 scale to supplement that. And I'm hoping that sort of scale is going to work. I'm really looking for sort of industrial type stuff, so water towers, fuel bowsers.
How do you find that? How are you finding the scales between the model railway kit that you've been finding on eBay and what we like to think of as 28mm scale or size, if that is a scale?
Yeah, it's interesting. It depends what you're looking for. If you were going to buy a model railway person who stands on a platform, the type of plastic figures you can get, that would look ridiculous standing next to one of the War Games figures. A, they're much more naturally proportioned than any War Games figures are, and B, they're bright pink and have bright yellow hair, and they look like they've been painted by someone with eyesight issues. But more importantly, they're just completely the wrong scale. Whereas when you take something like a water tank, it's kind of scale neutral, or a big crane, or You're looking at something like taking railway tracks. It doesn't matter if they're precise or not. One of the things that I've made up, which I have had actually made for me, is marching at war bases. When I was on holiday a couple of months ago, I sent him a text saying, "Can you make me a tram in MDF?" He said, "When are you back from holiday?" I said, "About 4 days." When I got back from holiday, there was an MDF tram on on my doormat. Fortunately, not one-to-one scale. And he'd done a really superb job with them, and they're actually now available on his website. So I put together about 4 or 5 of them, nicely smashed up, absolutely perfect for Stalingrad. And I can assure you, smashing up an MDF tram is a lot easier than smashing up a die-cast metal tank. So it's brilliant to be able to put something together and then just give it that sort of battle-affected look. So yeah, it's all go Stalingrad for me at the moment. And part of that is a series of 3 chain of command campaigns that I'm looking to develop, which follows a pioneer battalion from the point where they attack in Fall-Blau in the sort of July and August and attempt to find a bridge over the Don. They're then moving into Stalingrad with the second campaigns where they're going through the outskirts and the more semi-rural suburbs, and then the third campaign where they're fighting into Stalingrad in the city itself, which I think is a trilogy, or maybe even a 4-part trilogy, where we have the desperate fight to the death at the very end. What's that, a quadrilogy? A
quadrilogy, maybe? Who knows? But that's one
Clearly
of those.
Not you.
A quadrilogy? Isn't that what the doctor gives you?
Well, I think what it certainly is, it sounds like an iconic sort of campaign. I think that's one of the great things about Chain of Command is that you can actually play some of those really iconic campaigns.
Yeah, you can, and you're taking a snapshot of what's happening down at grassroots level, and hopefully that gives you an insight into how bloody awful it was.
Yeah. How about you, Nick?
Well, interestingly, just on the Stalingrad link, that I've been, having read the Beaver book many years ago on Stalingrad, I've been listening to it in the car on the audio book, and it's really nice to reconnect to that. Anyway, so yeah, we're looking forward to Stalingrad, but for me...
That's good. Do you remember in the first episode, we had a 200-pound badger, now we've got a beaver.
Well...
It's animals of lard, it could be good.
A 200-pound beaver would be a totally different podcast.
Right.
So, for me, however, I'm still back in the land of sharp practice. I've been doing some more stuff on the smugglers. And really, when we say on the workbench, you could say down at the dockyard.
Right.
I've been doing some stuff with rafts and boats to support what we're doing on the smugglers, but also moving towards the French-Indian War.
Oh, monsieur.
Yeah. Doing some figures for that, so some French and some British to go with that, to exploit some of the stuff we're doing about canoes and having stuff around rivers. So
Great period for
something
sharp.
very, very different to Stalingrad.
Yeah.
So that will give us a nice mix of stuff, I think.
Yeah, good. Sounds exciting. Well, I can't wait to see that. We've been having some great fun with the smuggling stuff, and it'll be good to take that nautical fun up the Yukon.
Yeah, well, there's lots of great things about the naval games. It's just a way of distributing troops onto the table, using boats as jump-off markers and that kind of stuff. Is really exciting. And, of course, you've got the same issue there about scale when you talk about boats and how you actually put figures on a boat. So, for instance, how many war games figures can a 1/48 scale rowing boat actually hold?
That's a real issue, isn't it?
It is, and so when it comes down to gaming, how do you move troops around using model boats? It's kind of an interesting dilemma that it creates.
That's a really interesting point, because when I looked at those trams, I thought you could man the trams with troops who are fighting out of them, but the problem is we put bases on figures.
Yeah.
So whereas that tram in Stalingrad would probably take 30 passengers, you could probably only get 8 figures in there.
If that.
Yeah. And that's got to be a real issue when you're trying to play a game with boats, mind you. That could be a whole new subject, Nick and men on boats.
Well, I think
in one of our 4 future podcasts. But interesting.
If anyone's an expert with men on boats, it's going to be Nick here, isn't it? Well,
that wasn't quite what we were thinking you were going to say there. So, anyway, what have you been up to, Squiddly?
Well, I haven't been making trams, but I've been making trains. But these trains no, these are artillery trains. So sorry to disappoint, folks. So I've been looking at trying to put together a Flemish artillery train. of the 17th century, and you hopefully would have seen on Twitter that I've been putting together yet more ancient sort of stuff which I've had since the 1980s from QT models this time.
Wow.
Artillery limbers, heavy horses, and some really beautiful late Renaissance guns, matching them again with the Dixon artillery figures and some converted stuff from the ECW. And that's been a lot of fun, but it has been quite frustrating. Once you start chopping and bits of metal up as horses' heads and changing to limbers and traces, it can be quite a frustrating sort of stuff, and but be having fun with it, which is the main thing. So that's been my last couple of weeks.
Frustrating fun.
Well, that's wargaming for you, isn't it, at times?
Chopping off horses' heads.
Well, there you go.
I should add that that's not real horses' heads.
Right, I was going to say, I've seen a film about that, Sidney.
My previous employer. Well, that was interesting. But now we're going to move on and look at today's big issue. Now, one of the emails I've received is from Carl in Bridlington, and Carl would like to know how a set of rules begins.
Ooh.
Well, Nick, you and Rich have designed games together, and you've designed them individually. So what prompts that process to begin?
Well, it's a desire for a game that gives the outcome that you want. What would you say, Rich? Get us started on this.
I'd say what normally happens is I come up with an idea at the club and I say, why don't we start with this? And a week later, Nick comes in and he's nicked it and has already written half the rules.
If only.
I think it's inspiration, isn't it? Inspiration can come from anything, and that's true of everything in life. You go into a pub 100 times, but one day you go in there and your eyes meet across a crowded room and there's somebody who you want to spend the rest of your life with. It's a bit like that with wargaming. You might be reading a book, you might be watching a film, and suddenly something clicks, and you just think, hey, I quite fancy giving that a go. And often my first port of call, but often because I don't know anything about the period other than maybe having seen somebody producing maybe a set of beautiful figures, and you go, wow, I'd love to game with those figures, and you think, oh well, hey, there's an osprey on that, and the first point of call is, am I actually interested in that, or am I just being seduced by the beauty of the product? We're going back to the lady in the boozer then maybe, but I want to find out more about this before I commit to it.
Do you think rules?
In many ways, designing a set of rules is like that kind of process of having to find out about whether it's something you really want to do. So you get the Osprey, you read it, and you think, okay, no, or you get the Osprey and you think yes, and then you go and look at other books.
I think there's a very, very dangerous phrase in my wargaming life, and it's this: that would be fun. So you're watching something on the television, or you're playing another game, or you're driving back from a show, or you're sitting around a table having a beer, and you talk about a campaign, and somebody says, that would be fun. And next thing you know, you're buying figures, you're researching the history, you're writing some ideas around a set of rules that are developing maybe some ideas from something you played previously, or some frustrations you had with another rule set that didn't quite give you the outcome you wanted. And this concept of that will be fun sort of keeps you going and drives you towards creating something that wasn't there previously. It's a dangerous 4 words.
Interestingly, I've got a phrase like that, and it's no, not a hope in hell. And that's when people come up to me and say, have you ever considered, would you consider designing a set of rules for this? And I think, no way. And then half an hour later I'm thinking, actually, that might be quite that would be fun. That's when we get, or I might say to Nick, that bloke over there asked me, have I considered this? And he's probably the one that says that would be fun. I mean, we had that with Sharp Practice. That came from a conversation with Simon Bargery, who was the guy who first set up bolt action miniatures before Warlord were involved with them, and he came up to me at Dunkirk Ferryport, home of the famous Roll de Sausage, and said to me, I've just bought 50 or so Napoleonic figures. Would you consider writing a set of skirmish rules for the period? And I said, no, not a hope in hell. And we were on the ferry rather than taking the tunnel back at that time.
Yeah.
And we had 3.5 hours on the boat, and we sequestered the business lounge by pretending that we were staff having a meeting in there and threw everybody else out, and used the floor of the business lounge to develop a set of rules, pushing around books and pencils and whatever to represent the units. And that was where sharp practice came from. Please don't sue me, Norfolk Line. So, I mean, that's several times people have said to me, would you consider this? And you think, no. But actually, it's that seed, what I was saying, something clicks in your brain, and you think that's where it is. But that, of course, is that an inspiration, or is that the acorn, or is that a pre-acorn phase?
I think a lot of things, when you come to inspiration, you can have inspiration which is hanging around in your brain for years and years and years. You've seen a book, you've seen a picture, you've played a war game, and for whatever reason it just doesn't click. You know, you have time when then you find the right person who wants to play a particular period, or a set of figures come out, or some terrain comes out, and that's what gives you the spark. So, you know, to use that metaphor, those acorns are lying around, and then suddenly you just find the right environment, and then it comes to a head. So we were talking about Last of the Mohicans a few weeks ago, Nick, and you were watching YouTube clips and watching the DVD of the sort of 1992 film, and those sort of ideas, I'm sure we all, when we saw the film years and years ago, thought, oh, that'd be great, wouldn't it? Fort St. George and Hawkeye and all the rest of it. But actually, it's only when somebody takes the plunge at the club and buys the figures, or you see somebody else at a different club doing that, you think, well, actually, you know, we all might have a go at that. And then it all takes off from that point.
Yeah, it does. And there's a key thing there as well, and I guess it's true in all walks of life, is that very often, the first time you put it on the table, it's a complete foul up. You have a go at something, you think, this is a few ideas I'd like to run out around this particular issue. The first time you get it on the tabletop, for whatever reason, for playability or for mechanics or for whatever, sometimes it just doesn't work. And you think at that point, oh, we'll go back to the drawing board actually. But what you get from that is the seed of something that does work. And sometimes you get a real energy around that, and you go back next week and you play it again, and something really sparks off, and you think that works really well, and we're building it and we're building it and building it. And what you said about things staying in your brain is really, really valid, because some things, when they come to the front of your brain, just come out really quickly and happen very fast, and other things just sit there for years and never get drawn on.
Yeah, that's true. It's almost like having a bank in which you can deposit ideas. You know, certainly of game mechanisms, you think, oh, I like that one, I'm going to put that in the bank. And one day, you can't shoehorn a mechanism into a game, but one day you'll go, I'm designing this, I need to overcome this. Ooh, that's a good one. Going back to the point about the first time you get something on the table, certainly the way we approach it now is that if we were doing, for example, French-Indian War, which actually, you know, we have played with sharp practice and whatever, but if I were designing a set of rules for French-Indian War, let's say, hypothetically, for the first time, I wouldn't say, right, lads, I'm doing a French-Indian War game next week. I'd say, what we're going to do is we're going to do a workshop, and we'll take it down there, and we'll literally put the figures on the table, or maybe not even put the figures on the table, maybe put the terrain on the table, and say, what next? Just really even taking it back to the basics of how do these people arrive on the table? And doing that with chain of command, we said, well, why do we line up troops on opposite edges of the table and then advance them forward? Well, the reason we do that is because we've always done it. Why is it that we roll dice in games? Well, the reason is we've always rolled dice in games for thousands of years, and we're comfortable with that. But sometimes you have to say, okay, well, why don't we try something different? And those workshop sessions are often the most interesting games that we have, because you're literally just putting something on the table and saying, where do we begin? And it's almost a Socratic process where everybody contributes and has their ideas, and then that tends to give you a situation where a week later, by the time we come back a week later, we've got something scribbled up that we can actually start saying, well, this is the genesis of a game.
And I think one of the things that has always been fun from those sessions is when you've taken an engine from a different period and an idea from a different period and sort of used it in a new period. What are your views about how we can use, or whether we should be trying to use, the same engine for different periods? Or are there sets of rules that you've written where a rules engine is really unique to that one particular period? Do you think it fits that period or the style of warfare so well?
I think it's interesting. It's a very interesting question, actually. It's clearly a case when any game designer designs a game that you're likely to get some kind of continuity between one game to the next. I mean, I always say that within the Lard family tree, there are several branches which are very independent. So, for example, Sharp Practice gave birth to Dux Britanniarum, which gave birth to Sharp Practice gave birth to Through the Mud and the Blood, which gave birth to Dux Britanniarum, which gave birth to Chain of Command, and possibly some others in there that I can't think of off the top of my head. But they're very definitely from the same family tree. But the feel of them is totally different game. I mean, Dux Britanniarum has a similar movement system, identical movement system, possibly, to Chain of Command and to Sharp Practice, but there are subtle differences. So you can take the same basic chassis, but the engine potentially is going to need to change. It's often a good starting point to take an existing set of rules and say, can I use this as a basis for that? And as often as not, the answer is no, as opposed to yes. But nevertheless, it has given you a starting point that you can come away from that first play test and go, you have the workshop session, then you have the first play test where you think, I'm going to try and use the Chain of Command rules as a basis for this. And then at the end of that game, you go, I didn't like that at all. We took the Chain of Command dice and tried to apply them to Sharp Practice, and that was not something that we were happy with. And that's why with Sharp Practice 2 we stayed with cards, but a very different deck of cards to the deck of cards in Sharp Practice 1. Again, if you look at the cards in Dux Britanniarum, where you have the specific Fate deck, that is very different to the game deck in Sharp Practice 2. Although there are similarities and crossovers, because the command cards in Sharp Practice 2 allow you to do some of those force characteristic things that are represented by the Fate deck in Dux.
So would you say, looking at Nick on this one, is it the rules mechanics which make one period of war games different to another period? Or are there additional things that you add into and look to add into a set of rules rather than just the mechanics to give it colour? Which is really at the heart? Is it the mechanics
I think
the chrome, if we like?
Yeah, well, the mechanics are very important for playability and for user acceptance, one of a different word, aren't they? But the actual period flavour comes from the nuances that you apply around the outside of the rules. So it's things like national characteristics, about how you build those in. And it's what are you trying to pitch the game at in terms of the level that you're working to. So, for instance, Chain of Command is platoon based. I Ain't Been Shot Mum is company based. Same war, different mechanisms, different way of approaching the game. Because what you want to try and look at, what you want to try and emulate, the narrative, which I know is a kind of I keep banging on about, is a different level. It's a different thing you want to get out. So it's the level of command that you're trying to build in that's really important, and that influences the nuances. What is influencing this guy on the ground, and how do I put the player in the kind of situation that he's making those kinds of decisions, the things that he should be basing his ideas around. So Kiss Me Hardy, one of the massive frustrations we always had with naval gaming was the idea that you had to be an expert into how to sail a square-rigged ship. Well, actually, if I'm commanding a fleet, I don't need to worry about that. I don't need to worry about actually what sail setting my guys use. I'm assuming there's guys who know what they're doing and they can do that. For instance, in a World War II game, it'd be crazy for me to say my Sherman tank is now in second gear and I'm going down the hill, I'm going to go into third gear and then go down to second gear before I go around the corner. But in naval war games, because of the technical aspects of the sail setting, we like those kind of games. It's an important part of the flavour. We wanted to get rid of that in Kiss Me Hardy, and we completely did. So it's about giving it the right level of decision making. What's relevant for the player to recreate the situation that we're trying to recreate?
And you're really talking there about systems of command and how command's interactive in the Napoleonic naval context with something like the weather gauge. You're really looking at how command, how signalling, how command within squadrons affects the battle, as opposed to how the individual ships were sailed in that example.
How do I manage the uncertainty of the battle is really what it comes down to. And the uncertainties are different on a World War II battlefield than they are in the skies above Dunkirk or in the seas off Trafalgar.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the key issue is, in warfare, you've got certain factors which are kind of fixed. Troops are going to move. How they move, well, it doesn't really matter. There's more than one way to skin a cat. As long as you've got a simple mechanism that people can pick up and learn and not have to keep referring back to the rule book regularly, as long as you've got a simple mechanism, that's fine. That's how they move. Firing. They're going to chuck things at each other, or fire things at each other, or shoot things at each other. Whatever term you want to use, you're going to get ranged weapons. It doesn't really matter what the mechanisms are. Frankly, you can roll d6s, you can roll d10s, you can consult a fire table, you can say 4 to 6 hits, or you can throw marbles from across the room. It doesn't matter. You are going to get hand-to-hand combat in warfare. Again, it doesn't really matter as long as the mechanism is easy to pick up and fun to do. I like opposed rolls, so if I'm firing at you, I roll dice to hit, you then roll dice for, against me to see how many saves you can get, whatever, because that keeps us both involved in the game. But really, it doesn't matter. But what is absolutely key, and what the roles have to focus on, is what is happening at command level, because what we are trying to replicate is the challenges of being in command of that army, whether that army is an army of many thousands of men, or it's an army of many hundreds of men in a Dark Age setting maybe, or it's an army of a platoon of 30 men. Or even a gang of half a dozen smugglers. Yeah. The important thing is replicating the challenges of command and doing that in a way that is poignant and relevant. You don't want them to be focusing on challenges that are not important. So, for example, if I'm refighting Waterloo, I, as Napoleon, am not interested at all whether the Lieutenant of Cuirassiers has got the little hammer which he can spike the guns with. Somebody else is dealing with that. That should happen in a sharp practice game. What I'm interested in is what's happening on my left flank. What can I see from the vantage point I'm in? I can see things going wrong over there on the right. So how on earth can I influence that? I want to launch an attack with my young guard or Imperial Guard or whoever. How can I make that happen as effectively as possible? So the challenges in that game should be the challenges that Napoleon faced. In a platoon level game like Chain of Command, the challenges Napoleon faced are irrelevant. I should be presented with the challenges that Sidney Jarry is presented with in his game, and that is what differentiates one set of rules from another. So you can use the same movement, you can use the same firing, but command and control is key.
That was really interesting, and as usual we're going to now wander along the landing overlooking the Great Hall to the quietest corner of Lard Island, the Lard Library. Afternoon, Major.
Afternoon, Sidney.
So let's talk about what books in the library we're going to be reading at present. I'm going to start this week. So the book I've just finished is called The Dutch Wars of Independence by Professor Marjolein ter Hart, who's a Dutch scholar and has written about warfare and commerce in the Netherlands, 1570 to 1680. Now that doesn't sound particularly fascinating, I know, but when you're looking at the 16th and 17th centuries, unfortunately you've not got many books which are just talking about military history. You've got to really mine a lot of history books which really aren't just focused on battlefield and campaigning to try and find out a little bit more about the context of warfare at that time. And that's particularly true that for academic histories, they're often packed full of interesting nuggets of information about how armies campaigned, the importance of routes of march, the relevance of areas where horses could be fed and obtain fodder, garrisons, the importance of fortifications. There are some books on that, but a lot of the time you're looking at just general history books and trying to take out of them the bits which you're then going to use to set a wargame scenario or a campaign, or maybe even put together a set of rules. And this was one such book which I thought was really interesting. So there is coverage of what she calls the Dutch School of War, which is really about how the army was organised and trained, but there's a lot relating to garrisons, river transport, the importance of sieges, and the financing of war. And I think that there's much which you can get out of a book like this, which informs how you want to wargame that period, going back to that experience of command, putting yourself as a wargamer into the same shoes as a contemporary commander would have experienced. And it's not just about getting your troops on the table. In the 17th century and the 16th century, it's really about keeping your army there. Rates of attrition, disease, the importance of winter quartering for troops, all of that really impacts on your ability to deliver a force onto the battlefield. And this book has quite a lot of detail about that. So that's The Dutch Wars of Independence, Warfare and Commerce in the Netherlands, Professor Marjolaine ter Hart, about £20 from Routledge, published last year.
And does that one have any pictures in it, Sid?
There are some maps, Nick, but no pictures.
No pictures.
Sorry to disappoint.
I saw a graph there on that
I'll be
page.
sure to bring a picture book in
Next time. Next time, please. A picture book would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Splendid. Shall I go next?
Yeah, good idea.
Okay. Right, so I'm moving us forward a number of hundreds of years to 1982.
Ooh.
So this is a book written about the Falklands War, and it's written particularly about the action at Goose Green. Now, it's the book I've chosen is called Not Mentioned in Dispatches, and it's by a chap called Spencer Fitzgibbon, and it's an analysis of the battle from top to bottom, viewed in terms of the way the battle unfolded at the very, very small detailed level, and with a particular looking at command and control. It's called, the sort of byline for it is The History and Mythology of the Battle of Goose Green. Now, I first came across this, actually, the one that I've got from the library, it's still got the library tag. It's one of those books, you remember, Rich, I know you've spoken about this.
What books you've stolen from the library?
One of those books
I spoke about it in court.
Yeah, when the library decides that it doesn't want these books anymore because nobody ever takes them out. And they sold it, and you can see it stamped there, sold. You see that?
Oh yeah.
It was acquired fairly and legally.
We like to call that evidence in the legal profession.
Your Honour, yeah, evidence that it was acquired in a fair and legal manner, and it's a fascinating book. I first came across this book thinking it was just going to be an account of what happened at Goose Green. It's much, much more than that. It talks about the way that the battle was planned and directed, and how the British Army's command and control systems almost collapsed in the face of such a complicated action. It is, therefore, to my mind, a really, really great example of friction, what we would call friction on the tabletop, and friction on the battlefield, and how managing that situation of uncertainty requires big men to do specific things to get the action moving. And of course, the key thing about Goose Green, as we all know, is the colonel of the battalion is killed. I don't put any spoilers in there, but the colonel of the battalion is killed, and the reason he's killed is that he goes forward to the front position of what's going on, where the attack is bogged down, to try and get it moving again. And the story of the platoon leaders and the company commanders that are going through that process and going through that action as well is fascinating.
What I find really interesting, if I remember correctly, and I'm pulling this out of my memory banks, is that H. Jones, who was the colonel of the Paras there, had planned an operation at Goose Green with something like 7 separate
6 or
phase
7
lines.
phases, yeah.
And so the plan was so complicated. The reason he had to go forward was that with each phase, depending on the successful completion of the previous one, but all the units involved having different jump-off times, different jump-off points, that it became so complicated that was why he had to go forward personally to try and really clear the logjam that had been created by this incredibly complex plan. But that's from my memory banks.
Yeah, that's
right?
explored quite thoroughly. I mean, it's only a relatively small book. I don't know how many pages are in there, Sid, but a couple of 100 pages probably.
Yeah, 188.
188.
Should say at this point that Sidney is currently colouring it in.
It's got lots of pictures.
Only the maps.
And it's got some good maps of the action, which are great, of course, from understanding what's going on. It's also got lots of good stuff at the back, which is the orders of battle of the various companies. I think it's got the battalion log of events as it went through. So it's real good quality of data there in terms of understanding the battle from top to bottom. But again, it top and tails with this discussion about restrictive command and directive command, and how the British Army doctrine really influenced the way that battle unfolded, and some of the lessons that might be learned from that. So while the Falklands War in itself is not really the way the British Army fought in 1982 wasn't really something that I was that interested in at the time that I first read it. The process of the way that the action unfolded and the way that commanders have to try and keep up with the rapidly changing situation that they're presented with is a fascinating study, and I absolutely recommend it to people. In fact, fairly recently, when a friend of ours was ill, I sent him some books in the hospital to cheer him up, and that's one of the books that I sent to him as being something which I think is, got to be up there in the top 10 books that you'd want to read as a wargamer.
Okay, and that's really interesting. And the reason I say that is it highlights something that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at books and choosing books, is really all books are not created equal. And when you're looking at designing a pint-sized campaign, for example, the type of books that, and if I'm walking over here to the bookshelves at Lard Island, and there's books on here, classic books, Berlin by Anthony Beaver, Armageddon by Max Hastings, Alan Moorehead's African trilogy about the Desert War. These are all big picture books, and they are great if you don't know why the Battle for Berlin happened and what happened in the Battle for Berlin. Those are the books, if you think you're going to be interested in wargaming an aspect of a campaign, they're the books that you should be going to get the big picture. But once you have decided that yes, this is a conflict you're interested in gaming, you need to then go in for more detail. And Nick, that's exactly the case with that book that you're looking at there. And for Stalingrad, I'm really keen to get first-hand accounts that tell me not why the battle was fought and how long the battle lasted for, but how the battle was fought and what the experience was of the people on the ground. And for Stalingrad, I've actually gone to a whole series of books written by an Australian historian, which may surprise some people to know that there are such things out there. But this guy really is absolutely at the top of his game, a guy called Jason D. Mark. And his focus has very much been on Stalingrad. There's books he's produced, such as The Death of the Leaping Horseman, which is looking at the 24th Panzer Division in Stalingrad, Island of Fire, which is the real classic, which is the battle for the Barricade gun factory in Stalingrad. But then he's got other things as well. For example, he's done a book on the Croatian Legion who were fighting in Stalingrad. And another book here I've just got called Angriff, which is the German attacks on Stalingrad in photos. Now, I know Nick likes picture books, so this is one of the reasons I've got this one off the shelf. But for me, who's actually studying the battle, having those images gives you a really great feel for the types of terrain that troops are going to be fighting in. And when you're developing a pint-sized campaign, to just have a picture book to go alongside the textbooks, which are talking about the people's experiences and actions, having that book of images, which is showing me, most of Stalingrad, really allows me to place the people where they were actually fighting and these events were happening. But the key book for me is Into Oblivion, which is the story of Pioneer Battalion 305. And that really is an excellent book, which covers the history of that Pioneer Battalion from May 1942, when it arrives on the Eastern Front, right the way through to the beginning of February 1943, when it surrenders and it goes into captivity. A real tale of desperate fighting. I mean, actually, the book goes earlier than that. It starts earlier than that when the battalion is actually raised, and it does give you an opportunity to find out how they went about their training and their time in occupied France, which is interesting, but it also introduces you to the characters within the battalion. So my choice for this month is Into Oblivion, because that's very much providing me with the sharp end detail that I need in order to produce a pint-sized campaign. It's very easy to make up a generic campaign which you can say is representative of the experiences of any number of units in a particular fight. But for me, I feel it's really important to feel that there's some kind of contact with the people who were involved. So when you read about the issues that they were faced, you can introduce things into scenarios which sometimes might seem, absolutely fantastic, as in, absurd, fantastical. But because these things happen in reality, you can put them into those scenarios to add real colour, and also to really appreciate exactly what experiences those particular units had. And I'm keen to produce, as I say, 3 pint-sized campaigns for Stalingrad, following that battalion through from its experiences on the Don right the way through to its the very end in Stalingrad. So Into Oblivion by Jason D. Mark, Kharkov to Stalingrad, the story of Pioneer Battalion 305 is my choice for this show.
So you may recall we've asked for some letters and emails, and we've been inundated. The first one is from Eugene in Arkansas.
Eugene.
Richard and Nick, where does the TooFatLardies name come from?
Well, that all came from when we first published the rules. I mean, we never intended to write rules for publication, but we just wrote rules. I used to write a lot of articles in those days for War Games Illustrated magazine, and at the end of one of the articles I put, if anybody's interested in the rules we're using, drop me an email. It must be right at the advent of internet. And several people did, and several people said, oh, you better publish these. I've told this story before, but anyway, Nick and I got together having a pint, and I said, if we're going to publish these, we're going to have a name. So I think beer had been drunk, and at the time there was a television programme called TooFatLardies, which was a cookery programme about 2 fat ladies who cooked things. So he said, why not TooFatLardies? And we went, ha ha ha, that's a brilliant idea, as you do after consuming a large amount of beer. And
I still think it's a brilliant idea.
And
it's untouchable.
It is untouchable. You can't get rid of it. It is not. If you were starting a commercial venture, saying, right, I want to invest a large amount of money to set up a business to make as much money as possible to exploit the wargaming market, you would not call it TooFatLardies. You'd probably call it something a lot more sensible. But, however, that wasn't the reason that we were publishing rules, and it still isn't really. I mean, the reason we write rules and publish rules is that we're wargamers and we enjoy it.
I think the fun part comes into it, doesn't it? Yeah, it's very much our driver in terms of coming up with that. Yeah. It's the.
And I ain't been shot, Mum, at the time. At the time, so many rule sets were called Sieg, über Waffe, Krieg, Führer, Reich rules.
Commander.
Yeah. And so we just thought, oh my God, this is just so absurd that we called our first set of rules I Ain't Been Shot, Mum. And the very first copy we had a picture of a soldier on the front looking at a letter, because the rules are about that human experience of warfare. So it has caused us problems over the years. I mean, we certainly had a big issue that a lot of people said, I'm never buying a set of rules from them, that's a ridiculous name, but it is what it is now. I mean, it's, there's many big corporations with very strange names, and if you think about the name Orange for a business, or Egg, or whatever, but these are all names that now mean something different to what the word actually means. And I think when people say Lardy, they're Lardy rules, people know what that means.
Yeah, it's kind of got something
resonance,
about it, some resonance that they can understand. And we should maybe say, I ain't been shot, Mum, of course, itself is something that might need explaining to people in Arizona, but
Arkansas,
I beg your pardon.
Sorry, Eugene.
Maybe, I don't know what the best thing to do, Google it.
Yeah, the television programme It Ain't Half Hot Mum, which focused on a British Army unit in the jungles of... They were a concert party, weren't they?
They were a concert party
in the
Burma,
jungles of Burma in the Second World War.
Yeah.
And so it came from that. And of course, thereby, our reputation was sullied forever as
puns,
being the company with the silly name.
Yeah, puns have been part of it.
Yeah, puns have been part of it. But to be fair, Chain of Command, Dux Britanniarum, Sharp Practice. Oh, well, Sharp Practice is a pun. But, I think, there's a lot of sensible titles out there as well. So that's where it came from.
So I hope that helps, Eugene. Let us know if
Quite
you need
how
more.
that would help him, I'm not sure. Well, Eugene, I hope that helps.
I hope he can sleep easy now, knowing that he has the answer to that.
So from wonderful Arkansas to equally wonderful France, we have a question from Gascon from Limoges.
Limoges.
Your logo, Richard and Nick, is a pie and a pint. To Nick, which is your favourite pie? And Rich, which is your favourite pint?
Well, okay. So it's a very personal thing, isn't it?
Pies?
Yeah, pies are
my personality.
Pies are important. Let's face it, there are some things in life that you couldn't live without, and a pie is one of them. I don't like kidney, so I struggle with lots of pies. So steak and kidney pie, for instance, which will probably be top of most people's list.
I like a steak.
Go straight to the bottom. No, go straight to the bottom. So, but I do like a minced beef and onion pie. That is lovely.
Lush.
And when I lived in South Wales, there was a chip shop in Pontypridd that used to sell fantastic minced beef pies, which they used to sell late into the night, and they were gastronomic pieces of excellence that actually wouldn't be out of place in a top restaurant in Limoges, actually.
And you had more than one?
I've had a few. I have sampled many pies, but I think a straightforward minced beef and onion pie is the way to go. My wife makes an absolutely fantastic chicken and leek pie with fresh sausage meat in as well, which is absolutely gorgeous. But
sausage meat. I can see that working well.
It works really, really well in a pie with a bit of white wine, lovely crispy pastry on the top. But I think if I was to go into it and buy a pie off the shelf in a nice little tin foil tray, it would go down very well, and it would be minced beef and onion.
So we had wine mentioned there, but Richard, your question's about your favourite pint. Now, you are a man who has been known to have a number of beers on an evening. Which is your favourite?
Well, an evening. Well, certainly a number of beers over my lifetime. Well, I have to admit that I like a bog standard cooking lager. I'm not into anything clever. I don't want strong beers. I want to have a beer that allows me to sit in a pub with my mates, having a laugh for the whole evening, and go home relatively vaguely half sensible, or at least not fall off a bridge into a river and drown. So I tend to go for, if I'm drinking in my local pub, I will have a pint of Carlsberg. If I drink elsewhere, I'm fairly partial to a Biera Moretti on draft.
Nice.
Pretty good. And if I'm pushing the top end, something like a Peroni is good. But the problem with that is, after 7 or 8 pints, I do fall off bridges into rivers. So yeah, just your bog standard cooking lager, and for me, at the top of the cooking lager tree, it's that wonderful golden nectar from Denmark. It's Carlsberg, brewed in Northampton.
Fantastic. So Gascon, there you go. There's your recommendations on pies and pints. And our last question for today, Anthony from Guildford asks us a question we have occasionally asked ourselves. If there
Why are we here?
No, Anthony asks us if there are only 5 types of people in the world and they are all in the A-team van, which one is each of us? Richard.
Oh, you'll have to give me a minute to think. Nick, you go first.
Nick.
Okay, the A-team. I would go for. I love it when a plan comes together.
Oh, right.
So I would be Hannibal.
Hannibal, right.
Yeah, for sure. Hannibal Smith.
I think you're more like Hannibal Lecter,
No,
actually.
more like, yeah.
And your waistline seems to confirm that. Well, if he's Hannibal,
Definitely Hannibal.
if he's Hannibal, I'm Mr. T, because I think he's a fool.
It had to be, didn't it?
Yeah. Actually, it's our journeys in the Lardmobile are a bit like Hannibal and Mr. T in the car, actually, it has to be said. Well, you're generally driving and I'm giving the instructions, so that's about right.
Yeah.
None of us are flying, though. So that's...
No, so,
No.
we can't come out with some of the more famous punchlines. I ain't going in no plane, fool.
No, we'll have to get you some more jewellery to wear. I think.
Yeah, well, I could carry off the hairstyle. Sadly, I don't think Sid could manage that one.
That I would pay to see. Sidney, what about you?
Well, probably face, has to be said. Totally superficial and rather fake.
Yeah, I'd go with that.
Well, that's nearly all for today. And before I untie you both from the railway line of destiny, can you tell us what's next on the Lardy horizon in the near future?
Whoa, well.
If I'm tied to the railway line, the horizon is a difficult thing for me to see.
Well, it's interesting actually. I can feel the vibrations on the railway track, and it's not a train coming, it's a sledge. It's a sleigh. It's Father Christmas, because on the horizon, Sidney, is of course the Christmas special. This will be our 874th special, or does it just feel like that? We've been doing them since 2004, so this will be our 14th Christmas special, and 32 specials in total, or something along those lines. So it's going to be jam-packed with stuff. Pirates! Ha ha! Ha ha! Is a word I'll mention. Ha ha! So,
actually, I'm massively looking forward to that, because I would love to have had that in the summer special, but it's just it wasn't quite possible to get it there in time, and so I'm really excited to have that in there for winter.
Sometimes things just don't fit, but it was great to be able to bank that one from the summer special, knowing that we've got a really grand centrepiece for the Christmas special, so that's going to be really exciting. I've got some interesting stuff coming up with Chain of Command. Where I'm going to be doing some more 1940 scenarios, because I'm really on that 1940 bus at the moment. You were talking about some French-Indian War scenarios.
Yeah, I think we have some stuff in there about French-Indian War for sharp practice for sure. And I think we still got. I think we can still say to people that if they're interested in submitting stuff for the special.
I think we've almost got time. Just about.
Yeah. It's a bit like getting your letters to Santa.
It is.
And you better be good for goodness sake.
Yeah. Well, I think we always pride ourselves on what we can put in the specials, and that they add something more to the Lard community. So the more we can bring in from the community and people can share, that's really, really good. So please send in your.
If we fancy it, we can always slip one in.
Well, that's useful to know. Thank you for that, Richard. So please don't forget to send us some more of your questions and comments. The next issue will be our grand Christmas show, where I'll be sorting through your letters and addressing your comments to Rich and Nick. That's all for this show, though. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time in a show recorded live in London's West End.
Oh, see you next time.
Good night.
Good night.
In tonight's show, Sidney Roundwood was joined by Nick Skinner and Richard Clark, with music by Roger Barraclough and his band.